Why did everyone laugh when she walked into the briefing tent with her rifle case? It wasn't loud laughter, not the kind you hear in a bar when a joke lands. It was sharper, quieter, filled with the edge of mockery soldiers sometimes used when they didn't understand something but wanted to make sure you knew you didn't belong. They didn't even need words. A smirk, a raised eyebrow, a muttered comment, garage sale rifle. And just like that, she was dismissed. Specialist Morgan Reed stood at attention as if the weight of discipline could shield her from the sting of ridicule. She had learned long ago that silence was sometimes the sharpest armor. Her pale eyes stayed forward, unblinking. But inside the words cut, because every laugh carried the same message: you're broken. You don't belong here. She knew why they thought it. The rifle wasn't regulation. It wasn't sleek black or factory fresh. Its stock was worn, the bluing on the barrel scoured dull by years of use. The scope was mounted with mismatched rings, looking more like a field repair than professional work. It didn't shine under the sun like the polished M110s stacked neatly in their racks. To anyone else, it looked like junk. To Morgan, it was the guardian. And that rifle had saved lives, though no one here knew it. Just days ago, from a sun-baked ridge high above the valley, she had ended an ambush with 3 shots. A SEAL team pinned, certain to be overrun, walked away alive because of her. They would never know her name. That was the point. She had disappeared back into the rocks before their stunned eyes could even search the horizon. A ghost. That's what she had always been. Now here she was, at Forward Operating Base Sierra Ridge, a name that sounded strong but felt brittle, built on the ambitions of a colonel chasing one last promotion. For her, it was supposed to be quiet. Recovery. A desk job in a uniform. She hadn't told anyone she'd asked for this. She hadn't told them about the nights when the smell of dust and blood filled her dreams, when she woke gasping, lungs remembering the collapse, bones recalling the weight of rubble in Pakistan. She hadn't told them she was still carrying the weight of 4 names: Denton, Periq, Sawyer, Chen. Men who had trusted her eyes, her trigger, and her silence. Men who had never come home. At the firing range the next morning, they gave her gloves and a canvas bag. Brass collection. That was her duty. She bent, lifted, moved, cartridge after cartridge. She kept her posture correct, her face neutral. They thought it was punishment duty, a way to put her in her place. What they didn't realize was that every shell casing she picked up was another chance to study, to observe the wind curling down from the ridge, to note how the mirage rippled above the sand at 900 hours, to map in her mind every quirk of this range like it was a battlefield. Stick to brass collection, specialist, Corporal Fischer smirked as she swept the line. The real shooting, above your pay grade. She didn't answer. She only brushed another line of dust aside, the broom's handle steady in her hands. But in her silence, she was already memorizing the way Fischer overcompensated for wind. The way Reynolds, his sergeant, flinched just before each trigger pull. She noticed it all. That was her curse. That was her gift. Later, when the range was empty, she pulled out the small leather-bound notebook she kept tucked beneath her uniform. Page after page filled with neat handwriting, diagrams, calculations, wind velocities, mirage effects, notes on each sniper's tendencies. It looked like something a ballistics engineer might carry. To Morgan, it was survival, control, a way to impose order on a world that had once spun violently out of her control. But secrets don't stay hidden forever. She returned one evening to find Fischer standing in the equipment shed, flipping through the notebook. His scowl had deepened into suspicion as he traced the intricate diagrams with his finger. What the hell is this? She stood in the doorway, calm but alert. Observations. Observing, he scoffed. You've been spying on us. These aren't notes for cleaning brass. These are advanced sniper calculations. Who are you really? For a moment, the air between them was heavy. Her instinct screamed to lie, to deflect, but training pressed her words flat and steady. Specialist Morgan Reed. Range maintenance. Fischer narrowed his eyes, but before he could press further, a gravelly voice came from the shadows. Problem Corporal. Sergeant William Hayes stepped into the light, his weathered face unreadable. Fischer shut the notebook, muttered something under his breath, and left. Hayes waited until he was gone, then turned to Morgan. "You should be more careful with that," he said. Morgan studied him, unsure. "You knew he was coming." Hayes shrugged. "Figured someone would, eventually. You don't exactly collect brass like the rest." And then he said it, the sentence that shifted everything. "Bring that rifle of yours tonight. I want to see it." Hours later, under the dim shed light, she laid the Guardian on the table. Hayes examined it like a relic, his hands steady, his eyes sharp. He saw what the others couldn't: the custom barrel, the wildcat chambering, the scope mounts engineered to fight harmonic distortion. He saw the craft hidden beneath the scars, and when he looked up at her, his voice was different. "This isn't junk. This is a masterpiece. Your ghost protocol, aren't you?" She said nothing, but silence too can be an answer. Hayes nodded slowly. "I trained some of your people, back in 2010. Never knew names, never saw faces, but I'd recognize this rifle anywhere." For the first time in months, Morgan let the truth slip past her guard. "I was, once." Hayes didn't ask the details, but the question still hung in the air. What happened? Pakistan, Operation Cobra Dawn. A compromised mission, 4 dead. She was the only survivor. The words caught in her throat, but she forced them out because saying them was the only way to carry the weight. Hayes listened, his lined face softer than she'd ever seen it. He didn't tell her it wasn't her fault. He didn't tell her to move on. He just nodded as if to say, "I see you. I believe you." And in that shed, for the first time since Pakistan, Morgan felt something she hadn't allowed herself in months. Not absolution, not forgiveness, but a fragile thread of connection. But connection was dangerous, because connection made you visible. And visibility gets ghosts killed. The next morning, Sierra Ridge buzzed with activity. General Marshall's visit was days away, and Colonel Davidson wanted perfection. Boots polished, equipment gleaming, every soldier drilled until they moved like clockwork. For Davidson, this wasn't just a base, it was his stage, his one last chance to climb. Morgan swept the firing line, invisible as ever, but inside the storm was coming. Fischer's suspicion, Reynolds' questions, Davidson's disdain, and Hayes's warning. Problems have a way of finding people like you. And as Morgan closed her notebook that night, her fingers lingering on the worn leather cover, she couldn't help but wonder, was the problem coming for her now? Or had it already arrived and she just hadn't seen it yet? Why was the colonel staring at her like that? Morgan kept her eyes down, pretending to adjust a target mechanism, but she felt Davidson's gaze burning through the Afghan heat. He stood stiff-backed, arms crossed, lips pressed into that permanent scowl. A man who lived in pursuit of flawlessness and hated when life refused to cooperate. "Specialist Reed," he said finally, his voice cutting across the empty range. She straightened instantly, posture regulation perfect. "Sir." "I see Hayes has you on actual maintenance now, not just brass collection." "Yes, sir." Davidson's eyes narrowed. "Everything needs to be perfect tomorrow. General Marshall will be bringing a delegation, Pentagon brass, Langley eyes, contractors who want their billion-dollar toy to shine. If anything goes wrong," his jaw clenched hard enough to show the tendons in his neck, "I don't tolerate complications." Morgan stayed silent. The colonel wasn't really talking to her. He was talking to his reflection in her eyes, reminding himself, reminding the world that Sierra Ridge was his stage. But then his gaze sharpened. "Your presence here remains a mystery to me, specialist. A redacted file, a transfer I didn't request, and a rifle that has no place on my base. You should know something." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a hard whisper. "If I find out you're here to undermine me, classified orders or not, I'll have you gone before the dust settles." "Yes, sir." The colonel walked away, but his words lingered like smoke. Morgan's expression didn't change, but inside her stomach coiled. She had wanted a quiet assignment, somewhere to disappear. But invisibility, she realized, doesn't last long when people start asking questions. That evening, Hayes found her in her barracks, the Guardian disassembled on her bunk. She was running a patch through the barrel, the movements calm, methodical, the way she kept the nightmares at bay. He closed the door behind him. "We need to talk." Morgan didn't stop cleaning. "About what?" "About the storm coming tomorrow." She set the barrel aside, finally looking at him. His weathered face was serious, more serious than she'd seen since the night in the shed. "Fischer been running his mouth," Hayes said. "Reynolds is asking questions, Davidson's suspicious. And the general," he paused, his voice dropping lower, "he's not coming alone." Morgan waited silent. "There's a CIA officer with him, Thomas Shaw, Deputy Director Special Activities." Hayes studied her face carefully. "Ring any bells?" For just a second, Morgan's composure cracked. Her hands tightened around the cloth until her knuckles whitened. "Shaw," she said quietly. "He was operational control for Ghost Protocol." Hayes nodded grimly. "That's what I thought, and there's more. He's bringing someone else. A so-called security consultant, scar down the left side of his face, military bearing." Morgan's pulse stuttered. She didn't need the name, but she said it anyway. "Kessler." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "You know him?" She nodded once. "Delta, recruited to Ghost Protocol in 2015. He was supposed to be our extraction in Pakistan. He never showed. And now he's coming here." Hayes leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "You still think this is just about a fancy targeting system?" Morgan set the cloth down. The Guardian lay in pieces on the blanket, its scarred stock and mismatched scope rings looking as ordinary as ever. But she could feel the weight of what tomorrow meant pressing down on her. "This isn't about the system," she said. "It's about me." The next morning the base woke before dawn. Soldiers scrubbed, polished, lined up gear until it gleamed. Davidson barked orders, inspecting boots like a general at parade. For most of Sierra Ridge, today was about a show. For Morgan, it was about survival. She ate breakfast in silence, a tray of eggs and bread she barely tasted. Across the mess hall, Reynolds and his sniper team huddled together, their eyes flicking toward her like hunters catching a scent. Suspicion, curiosity, unease. She ignored them. She always ignored them. Until Hayes sat down across from her, tray in hand. "They've stationed you at the far end of the range," he said quietly. "Maintenance duty during the demo keeps you out of sight." Morgan sipped her coffee. "Or keeps me in position." Hayes's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "I checked the guest list, Shaw, Kessler, and a third VIP listed only as a consultant. That's too many eyes for coincidence." He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "You ready?" Morgan looked down at her hands. Pale, steady, unshaking. The same hands that had pulled a trigger in Pakistan and lived while everyone else bled. "I don't know if ready is the word," she said, "but I'm here." At 900, the convoy rolled through Sierra Ridge's gates. SUVs black and armored, kicking up dust across the parade ground. Davidson stood ramrod straight, chest out, saluting sharply as General William Marshall stepped out first. Marshall was all authority, tall, broad-shouldered, silver hair cropped close, his uniform heavy with ribbons from wars fought across decades. He shook Davidson's hand firmly. "Impressive operation you're running here, Colonel." "Thank you, sir," Davidson said, voice tight with pride. "Sierra Ridge stands ready to demonstrate the full capabilities of the automated dynamic targeting system." Behind the general came Shaw, thinning hair, glasses, the quiet presence of a man who never needed to raise his voice to control a room. His eyes swept across the base, sharp, unblinking, cataloging everything. And then Kessler, taller than she remembered, his scar pulling the corner of his mouth into that half-grimace that had haunted her memories. He scanned the perimeter like a predator searching for prey. Morgan was already at the far end of the range, crouched by a target mechanism, pretending to check bolts. From there, she had a clear view of the VIP observation deck. She kept her head down, her movements steady. Ordinary, invisible. But invisibility only works when no one's hunting. And she could feel Kessler's eyes searching, cutting across the range, pausing too long on the maintenance crews. Not random, systematic, he was looking for her. The demonstration began. Reynolds and his team lined up with their sleek M110s, their every movement textbook. Targets popped at 500 yards, 800, 1,000, precision, accuracy, confidence. Until the wind shifted. Gusts rolled down from the ridge, scattering dust, curling like invisible rivers through the valley. At 1,200 yards, shots went wide. At 1,500, they missed altogether. Reynolds adjusted, recalculated, cursed under his breath. 10 minutes, 20 missed shots. Davidson's jaw tightened. Marshall was polite but unimpressed. The contractors murmured behind clipboards. The golden ticket was slipping through Davidson's fingers. And then Morgan's voice cut through the silence. "Permission to attempt the course, sir." Every head turned. Davidson's eyes narrowed. "Specialist Reed, you're assigned to maintenance." "My work is complete, sir. I request permission to engage." Reynolds scoffed. "With all due respect, sir, this is a sniper's course. She's range maintenance." But Shaw leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "I'd like to see this specialist attempt it." Davidson froze. Refusal wasn't an option now. Marshall folded his arms, curious. Even Kessler paused his search, his scarred face unreadable. "Very well," Davidson said stiffly. "Sergeant Reynolds, provide her your rifle." Morgan's voice was calm, steady. "That won't be necessary, sir. I'll use my own." The silence thickened. General Marshall raised an eyebrow. "Let's see it then." 4 minutes later, she returned carrying the Guardian. She laid it on the mat, assembled it with practiced efficiency, her hands moving like a ritual. The worn stock, the dull barrel, the mismatched rings, every piece whispered of age, of scars, of battles survived. Reynolds muttered, "What the hell is that thing?" Fischer smirked. "Looks like it belongs in a scrapyard." Morgan ignored them. She lay prone, the Guardian resting on a sandbag. The targets popped at 1,500 yards. The wind gusted, dancing in chaotic swirls. Reynolds's team had failed here. The colonel was ready to dismiss her. And then the Guardian barked. The range officer's voice rang out, "Hit, center mass." A hush fell. Another target, another shot, another hit. By the 5th, silence had become awe. By the 8th, disbelief turned into reverence. And when the 9th and final target dropped, the impossible confirmed by the officer's voice, perfect score, there was no laughter left at Sierra Ridge. She rose, disassembled the rifle, calm as if she hadn't just rewritten the rules. Marshall's eyes gleamed with respect, Shaw's with calculation, Kessler's with something darker. And Davidson, his career had just been stolen by the woman he had tried to bury in brass duty. Why was the door locked behind her? Morgan stood in the small conference room, her rifle case still warm from the shots she had just fired. Shaw sat across the table, papers neatly arranged in front of him, glasses low on his nose. Kessler leaned against the door, arms folded, his scar catching the fluorescent light like a blade. "Please," Shaw said with a thin smile, gesturing to the chair. "Sit down, specialist, or should I call you Ghost?" Morgan stayed standing. "My name is Reed, sir, specialist, U.S. Army." Shaw didn't blink. "Let's not waste time. Your performance today confirmed what I already knew. That rifle, those calculations. You've been playing maintenance worker, but ghosts don't disappear so easily." The silence in the room grew heavy. Shaw slid a folder across the table. Black and white photos spilled out, satellite images, tactical maps, and then bodies on a mountainside. She didn't need the captions. She knew their faces by memory, not paper. Denton, Periq, Sawyer, Chen, her team. Operation Cobra Dawn, Shaw said, his voice flat, almost clinical. A failure, 4 dead, 1 survivor, you. Morgan's throat tightened, but she kept her voice calm. That's classified beyond this room. General Marshall has temporary clearance, Shaw said with a dismissive wave, and Colonel Davidson doesn't need to know a thing. His eyes sharpened. What I want to know, Ghost, is why you asked for this place. Why Sierra Ridge? She lowered herself into the chair at last, her back straight. Recovery assignment, somewhere quiet, somewhere out of sight. And yet, Shaw said softly, this quiet little base sits less than 50 miles from where Ibrahim Zarqawi has been rebuilding his network. He tapped the photos. Pure coincidence, right? Morgan didn't answer. Her silence was safer than a lie. Kessler finally spoke, his voice gravel and steel. We've confirmed Zarqawi's compound, 37 miles northeast. We're launching a strike tonight. Morgan's eyes flicked to the thermal image Shaw slid across the table. A fortress tucked into the mountains, defensible, remote. She studied it the way her mind always did, angles of approach, lines of sight, natural cover. Then she asked the question that mattered. My role? Shaw leaned back, folding his hands. Officially, none. You're here for recovery, that's what your paperwork says. Unofficially, he let the pause linger, sharp as a knife. Unofficially, you'll provide overwatch. 1 shot, 1 kill. Zarqawi doesn't leave that compound alive. Morgan's jaw clenched. Why me? You have a strike team. Because this is also about you, Shaw said evenly. You're the only survivor of Cobra Dawn, the only one who saw how it went wrong, and you've been sitting in the shadows ever since. Too quiet, too careful, that makes people nervous. His gaze sharpened. We need to know if you're still an asset or a liability. The word hung in the air like a loaded round. Liability. Morgan's chest tightened. She thought of waking up in a German hospital, lungs stitched, spine braced, every inch of her screaming to quit to fade away. She thought of the nights she couldn't sleep, seeing her team walk into the ambush again and again. And now Shaw was sitting here, weighing her life on a scale, calling her a question mark. Liability, sir, she asked quietly. Shaw didn't flinch. You have knowledge, you have scars. If your mind isn't steady, you could be dangerous. That makes you either a tool to sharpen or a thread to cut. Kessler shifted near the door, his hand brushing the side of his jacket where a weapon likely waited. Morgan breathed slowly. She knew this game. It was the same one she'd played in Pakistan. Trust no one. Read everything. Every detail mattered. Finally she said, give me the overwatch. Zarqawi was my target once. I'll finish what I started. Shaw studied her, weighing her like an equation. Then he nodded once. You'll be positioned here. He pointed at a rocky outcrop with line of sight to the compound. Range, 2,387 yards, beyond even your record. You'll have 1 window, 1 shot. I can make it, she said flatly. Kessler's scar pulled into something almost like a smirk. Still confident, huh? Considering the last time I saw you, you were bleeding out on a medevac. Morgan met his gaze. Considering you were 4 hours late for extraction, I'm surprised you saw me at all. The room chilled. Kessler's jaw tightened. There were complications. There were dead men, Morgan replied, her voice quiet, steady. That wasn't my call, that was yours. He stepped closer, his hand landing on her shoulder, heavy enough to look friendly but firm enough to warn. His words came low, almost a growl. Don't dig where you shouldn't, Morgan. Cobra Dawn was a mess. Let it stay buried. Her eyes met his, ice against stone. You're asking the wrong person to bury ghosts. Shaw broke the silence, his tone clipped. Briefing in 2 hours, dusk operation, 1 shot, 1 chance, fail and you're done. Do you understand? I understand, she said. Shaw gathered the files, sliding them into his briefcase. Good. Then we'll see if ghosts still belong in this world. They left her in the empty room, Kessler's warning echoing like a drumbeat. She stared at the table where the photos of her team had been spread. The Guardian case rested by her side, battered and silent, but heavy with history. She whispered their names once under her breath: Denton, Periq, Sawyer, Chen. A promise, a reminder. Then she stood, collected her rifle, and walked into the corridor. Hayes was waiting outside, leaning casually against the wall, but his eyes were sharp. He studied her face for just a second. "They know who you are." Morgan gave a single nod. "They want me for the Zarqawi op, tonight." Hayes didn't react, didn't blink, just gave a slow exhale. And Morgan said, her voice steady but her chest tight, "This isn't just about Zarqawi. It's about Cobra Dawn. They're testing me, or they're finishing me. Maybe both." Hayes's jaw worked. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Then you need backup, real backup, not Shaw's men, not Kessler, people you can trust." Morgan shook her head. "Trust doesn't exist in this world anymore." Hayes's eyes softened just slightly. "Then find respect, that's close enough." He nodded toward the range where Reynolds' sniper team still lingered, packing their gear, throwing glances in her direction that weren't just suspicion anymore. Awe had cracked their arrogance. "They saw what you did today," Hayes said. "They'll follow skill, even if they don't know the whole truth." Morgan thought of Reynolds' hands tightening on his rifle after his misses, of Fischer's scowl, of the way silence had replaced mockery after her 9th perfect hit. Respect, maybe. Trust, never. But sometimes respect was enough to carry you into a fight. She adjusted the Guardian's case in her hand, its worn leather handle pressing deep into her palm. Tonight, she would walk into another ambush, one more valley of shadows where the wind never blew straight. She didn't know if she'd walk out. But one thing was certain. This time, she wouldn't walk in blind. Why did the wind die just as she set her rifle down? Morgan lay prone on the ridge, the Guardian resting solid against her shoulder, the bipod steady on the uneven rock. For hours the wind had twisted through the valley, curling dust and grit into phantom rivers. But now, at the very moment she needed to measure its voice, the air fell silent. No whispers, no sway of the thorn scrub, just the kind of stillness that never lasted, the kind that warned a storm was building. Through her scope, the compound glowed with faint infrared outlines. A fortress of mud walls and corrugated tin, ringed with spotters, radio antennas, and heavy shadows. She knew Zarqawi was inside. She also knew something wasn't right. The range was obscene, 2,387 yards, nearly a mile and a half of air, wind, and gravity between her and the man they wanted dead. She could make it, maybe, but the math was unforgiving. The bullet's flight time would be nearly 4 seconds. 4 seconds where the world could tilt, where a man could lean, where a gust could bend the arc of fate. Hayes's voice crackled faintly in her earpiece. "Overwatch, confirm position." "Overwatch set," Morgan whispered. Her words carried steady, but inside her heartbeat pressed against her ribs. "Target's moving," Hayes said. "Strike team at holding point, awaiting your mark." Below, a squad of operators crouched in the shadows, rifles tight against their chests. Not her men. Not Ghost Protocol. She didn't know their names. But she knew what it felt like to wait in the dirt for someone unseen to decide whether you lived or died. And in that thought came the sharp edge of memory. Denton's laugh before dawn, Sawyer humming under his breath, Periq always fiddling with his scope like it was alive, Chen rolling his eyes at them all. Gone. 4 ghosts who had once trusted her eyes, her trigger, her silence. She forced the memory down and focused on the glass. Movement at the gate, 2 figures stepping into the floodlight. One was tall, broad, carrying authority in the tilt of his shoulders. The other walked half a step behind, cautious. Guards flanked them, rifles ready. "Possible target," Hayes said. "Confirm." Morgan steadied her breathing, tracing every detail. The man in front, heavyset, beard trimmed short, face too familiar from the grainy files Shaw had shown. Zarqawi. She exhaled, finger resting on the trigger. The shot was possible, Hard but possible. Confirming target, she whispered. High probability. Then the floodlights shifted, illuminating the second man. His face turned just enough to catch the glow. Morgan froze. Her stomach clenched so hard she thought she'd be sick. Because she knew that face, though she had only seen it once, grainy, blurred in the heat of a collapsing safe house in Pakistan. The man who had whispered coordinates into Chen's radio. The man who had walked away before the ambush. The betrayer. But he wasn't supposed to be here. Her voice cracked through the calm. Overwatch to command, second figure confirmed as hostile asset. Repeat, hostile asset present. Hayes's reply came fast. Say again. I have eyes on secondary target, connected to Cobra Dawn, high value. Static hissed. Then Shaw's voice cut in cold and clipped. Overwatch, disregard secondary. Your target is Zarqawi. Do not engage anyone else. Morgan's jaw tightened. Negative, sir. Secondary target is priority. He compromised Ghost Protocol. You don't have that authority, Shaw snapped. One target, Zarqawi, that is your order. Kessler's voice followed, gravelly and sharp. You take the shot, Ghost, or you're finished. Morgan's finger tightened on the trigger, the crosshairs holding steady. Two men stood in the floodlight just feet apart. She could only choose one. And her silence filled the valley. Time stretched, 3 seconds, 4, 5. The operators below shifted nervously, waiting for her call. In the back of her mind, the voices of her dead whispered Denton, Periq, Sawyer, Chen. This was the man who had sold them out. This was the ghost maker. But Shaw's order pressed like a knife against her throat. One wrong move, and she wouldn't just lose the mission. She'd lose everything. Hayes's voice came soft but steady. Morgan, trust your eyes. She breathed once, slow and deep. The Guardian cracked. The valley held its breath as the bullet carved through 1.5 miles of air, a thread of copper and fire stitching across silence. 4 seconds, an eternity. And then the secondary target dropped. Shouts erupted in the compound. Guards scrambled. Zarqawi ducked into the shadows, vanishing inside the gate. The strike team surged forward, breaching with fire and thunder. Shaw's voice exploded in her ear. What have you done? Morgan rolled her rifle, chambering the next round. Calm, cold, purposeful. What you couldn't. Gunfire echoed below, bursts of orange against the dark. She tracked Zarqawi through the windows, catching glimpses of his shape as he fled deeper inside. Another shot. Too late. He vanished again. The calm filled with chaos. Operators shouting. Explosions rocking the compound. And Shaw's furious voice cutting through it all, promising consequences that would come with the dawn. But Morgan didn't move. She stayed on the ridge, scanning, waiting, her rifle a silent judge. Minutes stretched into an hour, then silence again. The compound smoked. The strike team exfiltrated, dragging wounded with them. Zarqawi was gone. The betrayer was dead. And Morgan Reed had just chosen her ghosts over her orders. At 200, she returned to Sierra Ridge. The Guardian case hung heavy in her hand, its weight doubled by what she had just done. The base was quiet, but the command tent glowed with light. Shaw was waiting inside. His glasses glinted as she stepped in, but his eyes were ice. Kessler leaned against the wall, arms folded, scar tight with anger. You disobeyed a direct order, Shaw said. You compromised the mission. Zarqawi is alive because of you. Morgan met his gaze, her face calm, her voice even. The man I killed tonight was the reason Cobra Dawn failed. The reason 4 Americans died. That was justice. Justice? Shaw's voice rose, sharp for the first time. You think this is about justice. This is about control, orders, structure. Without it, men die. You don't get to rewrite the mission because of your feelings. She didn't flinch. No, sir, I rewrote it because of the truth. The room burned with silence. Finally, Shaw turned away, snapping his briefcase shut. You're done here, specialist. Tomorrow morning I'll have you on the first flight out. You'll answer for this in Washington." Kessler's smirk returned, dark and satisfied. "Told you ghosts don't last long." But Morgan only picked up her rifle case, the leather handle worn smooth beneath her hand. "Sometimes," she said softly, "ghosts last longer than the men who made them." She walked out into the night, the desert air cool against her face, her mind burning with the certainty of what she had just done. She hadn't finished her war, she had only opened a door. Why was everyone staring at her in the mess hall? Morgan carried her tray like nothing had changed, scrambled eggs cooling on one side, bread untouched on the other. But the air felt heavy, every conversation dropping when she passed, every eye flicking toward her rifle case propped against the wall. Soldiers knew when something had cracked in the chain of command. They didn't need the details. They only needed the silence that followed her. She sat alone as she always did. The Guardian case rested where she could see it, scarred and ordinary among the polished rifles stacked at the racks. But last night it had spoken louder than any colonel, louder than any general. One shot, one choice. And now its echoes rattled across Sierra Ridge. Across the room, Reynolds and Fischer sat with their sniper team, their usual arrogance tempered. They weren't laughing. They weren't mocking. They were studying her like students trying to understand a lesson they'd never been taught. The door slammed open. Davidson entered, uniform perfect, jaw tight, rage barely contained. His eyes locked on Morgan and the mess hall went dead silent. "Specialist Reed," he barked, "on your feet." She stood calmly, leaving the tray untouched. "Sir." "Office now." The colonel didn't wait for her. He turned, boots striking hard against the floor, expecting her to follow. She did. The whispers behind her were quick and sharp, but she ignored them. Inside his office, the blinds were drawn. The desk was bare except for a single report. Shaw stood in the corner, his glasses catching the light, face carved from stone. Kessler leaned casually against the filing cabinet, arms crossed, his scarred mouth tugged into a satisfied curl. Davidson slammed the door shut and rounded on her. "You embarrassed this base. You humiliated me in front of a four-star general. You disobeyed direct orders. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Morgan's voice stayed level. "I neutralized a hostile asset, the man who compromised Cobra Dawn." "Cobra Dawn is irrelevant," Davidson snapped. His face flushed red, veins rising in his neck. "What mattered was Zarqawi, and thanks to you he's still breathing. My chance at a flawless demonstration gone, my career hanging by a thread, and all because some ghost couldn't follow orders." Shaw stepped forward, calm where Davidson was fire. "Colonel, enough." He adjusted his glasses, eyes pinning Morgan. "This isn't about your career. This is about control. She disregarded command authority. That cannot go unpunished." Davidson glared, but Shaw's authority outweighed his rank. For a moment, Morgan saw the truth in his eyes. Davidson wasn't angry about the mission. He was angry that she had stolen his stage. Shaw turned to her. "Effective immediately, Specialist Reed, you are relieved of duty. You will be transported to Bagram at 600 for reassignment and review. Pending that review, your clearance will be revoked. Do you understand?" Morgan met his gaze. "Yes, sir." Kessler chuckled low, shaking his head. "That's it. She gets a ticket home after disobeying a direct order. If it were my call, she'd never make it to Bagram." The words hung in the air, too casual to be harmless. Morgan didn't flinch, but her mind filed it away. A warning or a promise? Davidson dismissed her with a wave. "Get her out of my sight." She left the office, the door clicking shut behind her. The corridor was quiet, but Hayes was waiting, leaning against the wall with that same unreadable calm. "Well," he asked. "They're sending me to Bagram," she said. Hayes studied her face, or trying to. They walked together across the compound. Morgan kept her eyes forward, her voice low. "They want me gone before questions get asked. Shaw's covering something. Kessler too." Hayes nodded once, Cobra Dawn. Her throat tightened at the words. She hadn't said it out loud since the ridge. They're burying it again. They reached the firing line where Reynolds and his team were cleaning rifles. Fischer glanced up, his usual smirk gone, his expression tight. Reynolds rose, wiping his hands on a rag, eyes never leaving Morgan. "You disobeyed," Reynolds said. "Not accusation, not mockery, just a statement." "I made a choice," she answered. Reynolds studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "You hit 2,000 yards in wind last week. You hit 2,300 last night. We missed those shots. You don't. That's not luck. That's not arrogance. That's something else." Fischer muttered, "Something dangerous." Morgan looked between them, her voice quiet. "Something necessary." She walked on, leaving them to their whispers. But she knew the seed had been planted. Soldiers respect results, and respect once rooted spreads. That night she couldn't sleep. The barracks were too quiet. Her bag was packed for the flight to Bagram, but the Guardian lay across her knees, disassembled, cleaned, ready. She ran the cloth along the barrel, her hands steady even as her mind spun. She replayed the shot, the betrayer falling, Zarqawi vanishing, Shaw's fury, Kessler's smirk, and Davidson's desperation bleeding through every word. Hayes's warning echoed in her mind. "Problems have a way of finding people like you." At 300, a shadow moved outside her window. She froze, her hand drifting toward the pistol under her pillow. Footsteps, soft, wrong. She rose silently, sliding the magazine home with a click softer than a heartbeat. The door creaked, a silhouette entered. Morgan didn't hesitate. The pistol pressed cold against the intruder's temple before the man even cleared the threshold. "Don't move." The figure froze. Then Hayes's voice whispered, steady but urgent, "Easy, it's me." She lowered the pistol, tension still coiled tight. "You nearly got yourself killed." "Wouldn't be the first time." He closed the door quickly. "They're not sending you to Bagram, not alive." Morgan's chest tightened. "Kessler." Hayes nodded grimly. "I overheard him. He wants it to look like an accident en route. Quiet, untraceable. Shaw didn't stop him." The words cut colder than she expected. "Shaw gave the order." "Didn't need to. His silence was enough." Morgan sat on the edge of the bunk, the pistol still in her hand. The Guardian rested against the wall, silent, waiting. "Then I don't make it to that convoy," she said. Hayes shook his head. "You won't make it out of this base alone. Davidson's itching to hand you over. Shaw's already writing your obituary, and Kessler," he let the words trail off. "You need allies." Morgan thought of Reynolds' steady eyes, the way Fischer's smirk had faltered. Respect, not trust, but respect was something. "Snipers follow skill," Hayes said softly. "They'll follow you." Her pulse steadied. A plan began to form, dangerous, fragile, but a plan. She looked at Hayes, her voice quiet but sure. "Then we move before dawn." The desert outside was silent, the kind of silence that hid sharp edges. Sierra Ridge slept under its thin cover of order, but beneath, betrayal churned. Morgan Reed wasn't going to Bagram. She was going to finish what had begun in Pakistan. And this time, she wouldn't be the only ghost walking into the fire. Why did Reynolds knock on her barracks door before sunrise? Morgan slid her pistol back into its holster, already awake, already dressed. The Guardian leaned against her pack, its case zipped and ready. She had been waiting for the footsteps, for the whisper of boots outside, but she hadn't expected him. When she opened the door, Reynolds stood stiff, Fischer half a step behind, both in fatigues, rifles slung but eyes sharp. Behind them, Hayes loitered in the shadows like he'd orchestrated this moment. Reynolds spoke first. "We heard about the convoy." Morgan didn't answer. Silence was her weapon, and she wanted to see how far he'd walk into it. Fischer broke it. "Word is you're not making it to Bagram. Mechanical failure on the road. Classic." His smirk was back, but weaker, stretched thin over unease. Reynolds' jaw flexed. "Is it true?" Morgan studied them both, reading posture, tone, the tiny betrayals in their expressions. Finally, she said, "If I get on that truck, I don't get off. That's true." The quiet settled heavier. Fischer shifted, uneasy. Reynolds only nodded once, sharp. "Then you're not getting on," he said. Morgan tilted her head, testing. "Why do you care?" Reynolds's eyes didn't waver. "Because last week, you hit 2,000 yards in wind no one could read. Because last night, you hit 2,387 and killed a man none of us even knew was on the field. Because I don't have to like you to respect you. And because I'd rather follow someone who can actually see than a colonel polishing boots for promotion." Hayes's voice rumbled from the dark. "Told you, respect." Fischer sighed, muttered a curse under his breath, then looked at Morgan. "You get one shot with me. Screw me over, I'm gone. But if you're really who they say you are—" He let it trail, but his eyes carried the weight of a bet placed. Morgan nodded slowly. "Then listen carefully. At 600 they'll load me onto that convoy. Shaw won't be on it. Kessler won't either. They'll wait for word I'm dead before they move, which means we don't wait." Reynolds crossed his arms. "You planning to run?" "No," Morgan said. "I'm planning to hit back." The room chilled. Even Fischer stopped shifting. Hayes stepped forward, his voice low. "The convoy will leave through the north gate. That's where Kessler's ambush will be staged. We flip it. Use their trap against them." Reynolds's brow furrowed. "Ambush the ambushers." Morgan met his eyes. "Exactly. If we're quiet, precise, we don't just survive, we send a message." Silence stretched, then Reynolds nodded once. "I'm in." Fischer groaned, rubbing his face, then muttered, "God help me, I'm in too." The plan was fragile, threadbare, but it was enough. By 5:30, the desert was still wrapped in blue shadow. Trucks idled at the motor pool, exhaust curling into the cold air. Soldiers moved with the drowsy rhythm of early hours. Davidson hadn't come, he didn't need to see her off. Shaw and Kessler were nowhere in sight. Of course they were. Morgan climbed into the back of the lead truck, hands cuffed in front of her. Routine. Appearances. 2 guards sat across from her, rifles slung but casual, too casual. They didn't know she wasn't supposed to survive the ride. The truck jolted forward, rumbling through the gate, onto the dirt road north. Every bump pressed the Guardian's absence deeper into her chest. Hayes had it. She had handed it over hours ago, trusting he'd be where he needed to be. It wasn't easy, leaving it behind. But ghosts learned to travel light when they had to. 10 minutes, 15. The desert opened wide, the road cutting through scrub and stone. Morgan watched the horizon through the slats in the truck's side. She knew the signs. The way the dust didn't drift right. The way the silence deepened. They were entering the kill zone. Then the pop of a flare. Gunfire erupted. The lead truck swerved, tires shredding under a spray of automatic fire. The guards shouted, fumbling for their rifles, but the world tilted before they could aim. Bullets sliced the windshield. The driver slumped forward, blood spraying the dash. Morgan dropped low, wrists twisting. The cuffs weren't military issue, they were sloppy. Hayes had slipped her a thin strip of metal with a warning, "You'll need this fast." She snapped the lock open just as the truck rolled into a ditch. She hit the dirt hard, rolled, and came up running. The ambushers weren't insurgents. They weren't locals. They were Kessler's men, clean gear, American weapons, night optics, contractors, killers for hire. They fanned out with precision, rifles sweeping, searching for her. But they weren't the only ones waiting. A single rifle cracked, one man dropped, another crack, another fell. Reynolds's voice came through her earpiece, tight but steady. 1 o'clock down, 3 left. Fischer's voice followed, lower, sharper. Got movement on the ridge, 2 more lining up. Morgan sprinted toward the wreckage of the truck, grabbing a rifle from the dead guard's hands. The steel felt strange compared to the Guardian, but it was something. She snapped a burst into the dust where one of the contractors moved. A cry. Silence. Then a sound she knew better than her own heartbeat, the Guardian's voice. Deep, measured, absolute. A shot carved through the air and the contractor on the ridge dropped. Hayes's voice came calm over the net. Guardian still singing. Morgan's chest tightened with a strange relief. The rifle was where it belonged, alive. The fight burned quick, sharp, precise. By the time the sun broke over the ridge, the ambushers were scattered in the dirt. None survived. Morgan crouched by the wreck, chest heaving. Reynolds and Fischer jogged down from their positions, sweat glistening, eyes wide with the realization of what they'd just done. Reynolds leaned on his rifle, staring at the bodies. "These aren't insurgents." "No," Morgan said flatly. "They're Shaw's, Kessler's, and now they know their trap failed." Fischer spat into the dust. "So what now? Davidson will hang us for this. Shaw will bury us deeper. We don't exactly get to stroll back through the gate after this." Morgan looked at the horizon. The desert stretched endless, the mountains a jagged line against the morning sky. Somewhere out there, Zarqawi was regrouping. Somewhere closer, Shaw and Kessler were recalculating. She adjusted the rifle in her hands, her voice quiet but steady. "We don't go back, not yet. We go forward. We finish what they won't." Reynolds stared at her. "You mean Zarqawi?" Morgan nodded once. Fischer laughed bitterly. "So let me get this straight. We just betrayed our command, shot up an American convoy, and killed Kessler's hired guns, and now you want to go after the guy we missed last night." Morgan met his eyes, her voice soft but unyielding. "I don't want to, I have to." Reynolds' jaw tightened. "Why?" "Because 4 men followed me once," she said. "They trusted me, and they died because I didn't see what was coming. I won't let it end there, not while the man responsible is still breathing." The desert wind rose, carrying the smell of dust and gunpowder. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Reynolds slung his rifle over his shoulder. "Fine, we do it, but if we're in, we're all in. No half measures." Fischer groaned, shaking his head. "This is suicide," but he didn't walk away. Hayes's voice came steady through the calm, as if he'd been waiting for this choice. "Coordinates to Zarqawi's fallback site are already in motion. You'll need to move fast. Shaw won't let this go unanswered." Morgan looked at the men around her. Not Ghost Protocol, not her old team, but something. Respect, fragile and untested, but real. For the first time since Pakistan, she wasn't alone walking into the fire. Why did the mountains feel like they were watching them? Morgan moved point, her boots silent on the rocky path, eyes sweeping every ridge and shadow. The Guardian rode against her shoulder again, its weight grounding her, familiar, alive. Behind her, Reynolds walked steady, his rifle angled low, scanning opposite arcs. Fischer brought up the rear, muttering under his breath every so often, his nerves bleeding through in curses. Hayes stayed off the trail, flanking through cover, his silhouette appearing and vanishing like a ghost of his own. They had left Sierra Ridge at dawn, slipping through gullies and dry riverbeds until the base's wire was just a memory. By noon, the desert had given way to jagged slopes that clawed at the sky. Somewhere beyond these mountains lay Zarqawi's fallback compound, the one Shaw would deny existed if pressed. Reynolds finally broke the silence. "Feels too quiet." Morgan kept her voice low. "That's the point. If you feel watched, it's because you are." Fischer cursed under his breath. "Great, love that." The wind shifted, carrying dust across the trail. Morgan stopped, raising a hand. They dropped instantly, rifles up, eyes searching. She scanned the ridge to the east, nothing. Then the west, a flicker, a glint where no stone should shine. "Sniper," she whispered. The first shot cracked a heartbeat later. The round hit inches from Fischer's boot, kicking dirt into his face. He dropped prone with a strangled curse. Reynolds rolled behind a boulder, scanning upward, searching for the shooter. Morgan stayed still. Motion draws fire. She let the world slow, her breathing steady. The Guardian slid into place, her scope cutting through the haze. There, a faint shape against stone, perfectly hidden except for the shimmer of glass. Range 1,900 yards. Wind left to right 5 knots variable. Mirage thick. She exhaled and fired. The bullet carved air, but the rock splintered feet from the target. Miss. Her pulse jumped, but she didn't blink. Adjust, recalculate, fire again. This time the rifle on the ridge snapped backward. The figure tumbled, vanishing from view. Fischer exhaled shakily, pressing his forehead into the dirt. That's one way to say good morning. But Morgan's gut stayed tight. Not one more. Reynolds caught it too. Counter-sniper teams run in pairs. The second shot came an instant later, slamming into the rock by Hayes's flank. He dropped low, calm, moving with practiced ease. 2 o'clock high, tight group, he's good. Morgan swept her scope, heart steady, finding the second shimmer. This one was better hidden. Range 2,100, mirage thicker, wind twisting. She calculated, adjusted, fired. The round missed. The counter-sniper fired back, forcing her down. Fischer muttered, "I thought you didn't miss." Morgan's jaw tightened. "I miss when the math lies." Reynolds's voice was sharper. "Then fix the math." She forced herself calm, replaying the wind, the shift, the shimmer. Not 5 knots. 7. Not left to right, quartering. She dialed, adjusted, exhaled. The Guardian cracked. The second sniper dropped. Silence reclaimed the valley. The only sound was Fischer's ragged breathing. Morgan slid back from her scope, chest tight. They were waiting for us. Sean knew we'd move. Hayes rejoined them, crouching low. Then we keep going, quiet, faster. They pressed on, nerves sharper now, every shadow suspect. Hours stretched. The mountains deepened. By dusk, they reached a vantage point overlooking the fallback compound. It was smaller than the last, but hardened stone walls, sandbag emplacements, radio antenna stabbing into the sky. Guard rotation steady. Fires burning in metal drums. Reynolds crouched beside her, studying through binoculars. "You're thinking we don't have the numbers." "We don't," Morgan said flatly, "but numbers don't win, angles do." Hayes slid a rough sketch into the dirt with his knife. Compound has 3 approaches. East wall, sheer rock, no cover. South gate, 2 exposed. North wall, narrow gully, blind spot from the towers. Fischer frowned. "That gully's a kill funnel." "Unless," Morgan said, "someone's watching from above." Reynolds looked at her, realization dawning. "Overwatch." Morgan nodded once. "I take the ridge, cover the gully, you breach, quick, clean, precision." Fischer shook his head. "This is insane, 4 of us against a compound." 3.5, Hayes muttered. "I'm too old to count." Morgan met Fischer's eyes. "Insane or not, we finish this tonight, because if we don't, Shaw will. And when he does, it won't be justice. It'll be cleanup." Silence, then Reynolds nodded. "We move at midnight." The hours crawled. Morgan lay on the ridge, the Guardian resting steady, her scope cutting through the night. The compound below pulsed with activity, guards shifting, fires glowing. But it wasn't the sight of Zarqawa's men that made her chest ache. It was the ghosts. She saw them in every shadow. Denton's steady grin, Sawyer humming under his breath, Periq adjusting his scope, Chen rolling his eyes, her team forever waiting for an extraction that never came. She whispered their names into the night, one by one like a prayer. Then she focused on the glass. Midnight came. Reynolds and Fischer moved through the gully, shadows inside shadows, rifles ready. Hayes lingered further back, steady, his presence the anchor they needed. Morgan's crosshairs danced over the walls. 2 guards, 2 shots. She exhaled. The Guardian spoke twice and the gully opened. Reynolds and Fischer surged forward, breaching with brutal efficiency. Muffled shots, thuds, silence. Morgan tracked them room by room, her rifle a silent hand reaching down from the dark. Every time a guard raised a weapon, her shot found him first. And then at last a figure moved inside the compound. Tall, heavyset, beard trimmed short, Zarqawi. Morgan steadied her breath, scope tightening on his chest. She had him. One shot. The ghost screamed in her veins. But a shadow stepped into view beside him. Kessler. Morgan's heart stopped. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be back at Sierra Ridge, safe, covering Shaw's orders. But here he was, standing beside the man they had hunted for years, speaking into his ear like an ally, not an enemy. The world tilted. Overwatch, Reynolds' voice crackled. We've got movement, call the shot. Morgan froze. Her scope cut between them. Zarqawi, the target she was ordered to kill years ago, and Kessler, the man who had left her team to die. One shot, one choice, again. Her finger tightened on the trigger. And in her silence, the mountain held its breath. Why did her finger hesitate on the trigger? Morgan had Zarqawi in her crosshairs, the man who had orchestrated bombings, ambushes, the kind of violence that turned valleys into graves. A shot now would end him. The mission complete. The ghosts of Denton, Periq, Sawyer, Chen could rest. But Kessler stood at his side, his scar catching the lamplight, his posture too familiar, too comfortable. He wasn't guarding Zarqawi. He was speaking to him, advising him. Morgan's chest tightened. 1,000 unasked questions screamed in the silence. Kessler was no mere soldier turned contractor. He was part of it. Cobra Dawn, the betrayal, the silence from the other side of the radio while her team died in the dust. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Overwatch, Reynolds hissed in her earpiece. Call it, who's the target? She didn't answer, not yet. Her eyes never left the glass. Zarqawi's lips moved. Kessler leaned close, listening. Two men who should have been enemies standing like allies. The truth struck her like a round to the chest. Cobra Dawn hadn't been a failure, it had been a setup. Kessler hadn't been late to extraction. He had been pulling strings on the other side, and Shaw had buried it. Her stomach clenched. If she shot Zarqawi now, Shaw would spin the story, erase the rest. Another clean operation. Another file locked away in Langley's archives, and Kessler would vanish into the shadows again, free to make more ghosts. But if she chose Kessler... Overwatch, Reynolds' voice snapped sharper now, desperate. Call it. Morgan exhaled slowly. The kind of exhale she had learned long ago, when everything narrowed to one trigger, one breath, one truth. She whispered, barely audible, trust the ghosts. The Guardian cracked. The round tore through the night, a thread of copper and fire stretching across 2,000 yards. It struck not Zarqawi but Kessler. His head snapped back, body collapsing against the wall. Zarqawi spun, startled, ducking into cover as shouts erupted across the compound. Gunfire ignited, chaos surging like a storm breaking its banks. Target down, Fischer shouted through the comm, though even he sounded stunned. Not Zarqawi, it was the other one. Morgan stayed calm, cycling the bolt. It was the right one. The compound roared alive. Fighters swarmed from doors and alleys, rifles flashing, grenades sparking. Reynolds and Fischer pressed forward, carving through the chaos with practiced precision. Hayes's voice steadied them from the flank, guiding, anchoring. Morgan's rifle sang from above, every shot a hammer striking sparks from the night. She dropped a gunner lining up on Reynolds, another about to flank Fischer, every pull of the trigger a thread in a web of survival. But Zarqawi was still moving. She caught him in glimpses, darting through halls, barking orders, fleeing deeper. Twice she nearly had him, twice he vanished. The fight burned hot, fast, brutal. By the time silence returned, smoke curled from shattered walls. The compound was broken. Fighters lay scattered, and in the center courtyard, Reynolds stood panting, rifle barrel smoking. Fischer's voice rasped through the comm, clear for now. Morgan rose slowly from her ridge, legs stiff from hours prone. She slung the Guardian and made her way down, the path steep, the night air sharp in her lungs. By the time she entered the compound, Reynolds and Fischer were waiting, their eyes hard but searching. Reynolds spoke first. You had Zarqawi, why Kessler? Morgan met his gaze, steady, unflinching. Because Zarqawi was just another head, cut it off another grows. Kessler was the blade that cut us from behind. Cobra Dawn wasn't an ambush. It was a deal. He sold us out. Shaw buried it. Reynolds studied her, breath ragged. You're sure? I lived it, Morgan said. Fischer muttered, Christ. Hayes limped into the courtyard, his rifle slung, his face pale with exhaustion but eyes sharp. He looked at Morgan, and in his silence she saw confirmation. He had suspected, maybe even known. What now? Reynolds asked, his voice quieter. Morgan looked around at the burning compound, the smoke curling into the dark sky. Now Shaw comes for us. He can't let this stand. Not with Kessler dead, not with the truth bleeding out. Reynolds spat dust. Then we don't go back. Fischer threw his hands. We don't exactly have a map forward either. Morgan's eyes drifted to the Guardian, scarred and steady in her grip. Forward isn't a place, it's a choice. They moved before dawn, slipping from the compound before Shaw's sweep teams could arrive. Through the mountains, through the dust, into silence. The sun rose behind them, painting the horizon red. By noon, they found a ridge overlooking the valley, a moment of breath. Reynolds sat cleaning his rifle, Fischer muttering while checking his scope, Hayes bandaging a graze on his arm. Morgan sat apart, the Guardian across her knees, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Reynolds finally asked the question that had been hanging since the shot. So what was Cobra Dawn, really? Morgan's chest tightened. She thought of Denton's grin, Periq's careful hands, Sawyer's humming, Chen's steady eyes. She thought of the radio silence, the betrayal, the dust closing in. Cobra Dawn was the lesson, she said softly. That ghosts don't die from enemy fire. They die from silence, from the men standing beside them, the ones they trust. The words hung heavy in the air. Fischer muttered, and we're supposed to trust you. Morgan looked at him, then Reynolds, then Hayes. Her voice stayed quiet. Not trust, respect. It's all we have left. Reynolds nodded slowly. Fischer said nothing, but neither walked away. As night fell again, the desert wind whispered across the ridge. Morgan cleaned the Guardian in silence, her movements ritual, steady, unbroken. She thought of Shaw back at Sierra Ridge, furious, already plotting. She thought of Zarqawi, still alive but weakened, his ally dead. And she thought of her team, 4 ghosts who had walked with her into the fire and never walked out. She whispered their names once more. Denton, Periq, Sawyer, Chen, a prayer, a promise. And then she set the rifle down, its worn stock gleaming faintly in the moonlight. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.